Hi, Alexander.
Hi, Sandris.
So it's a big pleasure for me to interview you on your piece, Perfect Circle. Can you a little bit tell me about the background or context of the piece? When it was commissioned, by whom?
Yes, well, it was commissioned by Eclat Festival and it was performed by Stuttgart Vokalsolisten. And it did not really turn out to be a classical vocal piece, I would say. It sits in a line of a few pieces, starting from Control and going over Perfect Circle, Unity Switch to Genesis. So it's kind of it's part of pieces which are in a way immersive, that work with video glasses and bodily virtual interactions, so to say. And yeah, well, they asked me to do a piece, and I think we started from something that was like a group therapy session or something like this. And then I think actually due to the fact that then they had two rooms that they both wanted to use, that actually led me to rethink the original proposal I had made. And actually there was quite a, let's say, lucky coincidence, because they had like two theater stages that could be used for the piece. And one idea was to do something on the one stage and just project it on the other for people to watch. And I was not really so interested in that. And so I tried to think of a concept that would kind of interlock these two places in a way.
And what's the main message of that piece?
Well, I can say a few things about that. Maybe even for somebody who does listen to this, it's even necessary to understand how the piece functions in order to actually make that out. But the piece is about body projections and kind of using technology in order to get the body, the perception of another person, or to change your own perception to a digital one. So it's kind of like a group experiment, so to say, that allows you to view the world either through a digital perspective or through a digital perspective of somebody else. So it is it offers a kind of perspective change, and so that's kind of in a nutshell the basic tech aspect of it. But what the important thing about it is, how does that make you feel, and how what does it do to you? And so you have these things that you and there's no main message in the sense that I want to say, well, this is my critique and here you perceive it. It's kind of multi-sided, I think, and also the way how people get out of it varied, like really a lot, from people really feeling uncomfortable with it and not liking it at all. And some people just really would enjoy it, and some people would enjoy it as a kind of strange experience, and for some it could actually even also bring you closer to other people. So it's not so black and white, but what is clear is that it's a fairly immersive setting that you kind of can surrender to. And when you do, then there are different aspects. So one is the question of control, how you feel still in control of your body, or somebody else might kind of be also be involved in controlling your body. Then it is how you, if you interact with somebody through a digitally mediated perspective, how you can still believe that to be true or accept it to be real in a way. So I think at some point we'll need to explain the technical background behind it. But what we saw there is that even if you're interacting with somebody just through a video glass that's of something that you don't even see at all, it is still very strong and you're able to accept it. So the, let's say, acceptance and rejection of different, let's say, ratios of virtuality, of control, and of different bodies, let's say, is in discussion. And it's a, let's say, comparison process between something that is imposed and then also changing the perspective again. So so the piece, for example, ends without any technology, and then you can reevaluate what you just went through in a technically mediated setting and your real world perception.
Got it. And right, as I understand, the main sensorial experience is these video glasses, right?
Yes.
Everybody has a video glass, and then there is a camera, right? Can
Exactly.
you explain how it works and what I see and what use somebody is like changing?
Yes. So Perfect Circle is fairly fixed in its setup and less, let's say, less complicated than Unity Switch is, which is kind of the follow-up project. In Perfect Circle, you have 2 rooms, and in both rooms there are 10, let's say, like a yoga or sports mats on the floor, and on each of these yoga mats, two people from the audience sit in front of each other. And so 20 people in one room, 20 people in another room. For simplicity's sake, one is called the real room, one is called the virtual room. In the real room, there's also kind of a stage setting and light, and there are also wind machines and other things. So it's a bit more grounded in the here and now, whereas the virtual room is super simplified. So everybody, in both rooms, all of the in total 40 participants have video glasses that they're wearing. And so video glasses is, you put that thing on and you just see a screen. So in the real room, the people have a camera below the glasses, and they see exactly what this camera captures. So that means that in the real room, people basically see a let's say, technical or digitalized version of their surrounding.
Mm-hmm.
So that in itself is not so much, but it surprisingly does a lot to you already, as it kind of really changes the way you interact with the world, and especially with the people that you're in front with. I'll say a few things about that. But as the technical setting goes, so the 20 people in that real room are all wired to the 20 people in the virtual room, and each of these 20 people transmits their perspective to the 20 people in the other room. And from that moment on, the 20 people in the real room are kind of like the, let's say, instructors, or kind of the reference model for the other ones, and the virtual room basically completely copies everything that happens in the real room. So they're kind of like a copy, so to say. And the piece is constructed as a as a kind of partner exercise, maybe. So it starts with breathing techniques. So at the beginning, when you put on the glasses, it starts in a way that you say breathe in, breathe out, and you do that together with tilting your hands. It's very simple, but it kind of lets you enter the setting, and it also gives the people in the virtual room the chance to synchronize with the people in the real room. So it's kind of an interlocking process, and from that moment on, kind of this connection sort of is established and then goes on. And yes, so that's how the piece starts, and then it starts to get more and more, let's say, intense, or also more bodily in the interaction that the participants have. So it then goes from holding hands, touching the face, and other things. So that's kind of what happens then. I think there's a middle section that's a bit more reduced in a way, and then it kind of goes up again and becomes super intense. So at that moment in the real room, it's like a tempest or something. Then the whole stage design is kind of rotating over you. Everything is kind of strobing and wind machines are blowing, and everything gets intense and intense, and you kind of start holding on to your partner. And it's a very weird, how you say, mixture of something that's very physical in that room and something that's also very abstract. So it's everything is, the people in the virtual room don't experience any of that in the actual room, but they're kind of projected in that. And so, yeah, so this kind of happens, it kind of climaxes like this. And then people are invited to take off their the glasses. And the final partner exercise basically is a bit like recapitulating everything that happened before, but now without the glasses. And in a way, that is actually the strangest part, because, and that's then maybe also a bit about the message already, the kind of the artificiality of this interface actually makes it quite fairly easy to get into these sort of intimate interactions somehow. You kind of surrender to this logic, to the whole system in a way. So that's also maybe an interesting aspect. It's like it's really kind of a system with its logics and so on. So, and then in the end you kind of take everything away, and then it basically says the same things again. Just look into the eyes of your partner, stretch out the hand and hold the hand, and it's so charged at that moment that it's that it's this comparison. And I think in general that is something that always interests me, the comparison of different perspectives. And here in that setting we have, well, this virtual, the real room, this virtual room with like different connections, different perspectives on the same thing. So kind of having one thing and looking at it from different ways. And then in the end you take off the technology and you look at it again from another way. And then there's also a third room, which is kind of like a supervision room, where another group of the audience kind of sits and sees everything on screens and everything. And you see us kind of running the experiment, so to say, with, let's say, turning on the rain sounds, turning on the wind machine. And so it's kind of like really like a kind of experimental simulation setting where we have the dials where it says rain, thunder, scream, I don't know, all these kinds of things. So it makes a difference for if you're in the audience where you end up, with whom you end up, in which room you end up. And so yeah, it might allow for a kind of multiple perspectives on a thing. And maybe one thing to also add, which I haven't talked about or just started to touch, is kind of the role of the performers and the ensemble. So it's, the way I describe it, of course, it sounds kind of, it focuses on the kind of theoretical or experimental aspect of it, but it's in a way still a kind of, I would say, a pretty musical experience in some way. So, and maybe two things I find at least of relevance is what's the role of the performers, and then what's the role of the sound. And so yeah, that's a good reference. The kind of the signal nature of sounds. So it's what I really started to like is to think of music and these musical objects as something that are linked to certain, let's say, actions, changes in the setting. So it's a bit taking this idea of a kind of test setting where it's more like, let's say, a beep sound that tells you, okay, now you get the next stimulus or something like this, or now we project this setting, and in this setting it's night and it's raining, and we turn that on. So it's very not so much as in absolute music where things develop on its own, but it's more like objects that are used to create a reaction, to frame the setting, to structure the setting. And so that's also what happens here. And then maybe, of course, it's interesting if it then transcends in a way, and you have those sounds, and then they kind of go off, go off the rail. So where they kind of leave behind their original functionality, let's say. And the other thing is, sorry for talking so much, I'll leave time for a question soon again. The other thing, I just don't want to forget the part with the performers. So it's also always a tricky situation, because the one thing I didn't want to have is that you do all this, but then also have a few people playing instruments and singing on a stage or something. So it's finding a balance not to compromise, let's say, the setting aspect of a piece, but also giving the room for the humans to be involved in the project. And so basically everybody of the performers were wearing kind of like white, how you say, like science suits, let's say. And they're kind of leading the experiment. So two of the speakers were kind of speaking all the, let's say, the instructions. It starts with instructions and then kind of goes a bit subconscious in a way. It becomes more poetic as the time goes on. And the other performers control the knobs, the kind of like you would do in an experiment, so to say. So it's kind of they're leading the experiment, and that's their role, that's their functionality. And then maybe last aspect about that, in the middle of the piece, so kind of first builds up, then there's a centerpiece that's very reduced, and there it becomes super personal in a way, and that is the voice of the speakers always kind of shifts or is doubled with the computer voice within that piece. So at the beginning, it's just the human voice, and then it kind of overlays gradually with this computer voice. So as we have kind of in this visual and auditory worlds, it's also in the speaking voice that it kind of nuances between something human and something very artificial. And then in the end, in this middle part where it becomes so poetic or so personal, then the computer voice takes over. So there's also kind of this discrepancy between who is able to communicate or mediate which kind of which feeling, which emotion, or which sensation of closeness and so on. So yeah, it's kind of this kind of double-sidedness of it that I find interesting.
Yes, got it. And what was the process of making this piece, right? How long it take, and from what was the starting point? And
yeah, so I guess the starting point for sure was the piece Control, which was in one sentence an installation where people would transmit their visual field of vision to control rooms, giving people the chance to control them. So that was let's say the technical starting point, and already what became, so in that piece Control, it was very much, well, as the title suggests, about control and surveillance and these aspects. But it became clear, surprisingly clear, that a lot of what was triggered in that work even was empathy and this kind of, or the willingness to engage with a different person, to accept their body as yours in some way. So it was kind of a natural follow-up, and to focus more on these aspects that were kind of already became apparent in Control. So and then, well, normally what I do is it's kind of a mixture of creating the tools and trying them out. So because the tech setup still is a bit different, and then what we did is together with Carl John Hoffman, who was working with me on the technical aspect of it, we created, let's say, prototypes, which looked like super 80s with wires and everything, and then made first tryout sessions, and checking what works, what doesn't work, and sometimes you realize, oh, what timing is necessary. And I think we did 2 of those, I think, and yeah, and I think that's how it went. So it was, yeah, the idea was clear, building the tech stuff, then really trying out if it works the way you want it to work, and kind of measuring the potential maybe. And and also becoming aware of let's say, side aspects that you don't think about so much, like this, for example, afterwards, the need to also to interact or to talk about this. So also this kind of framing is quite interesting. It left people definitely with the urge to say something or to communicate what they have experienced. So yeah, and then we started to work with the ensemble in a more or less conventional rehearsal fashion, let's say. And then I think we before the premiere, made it once with a test audience.
Yes.
Which was helpful. I think there we made a bit the mistake that the people were not enough prepared for what exactly they would enter. So the festival kind of had just gotten a test audience and brought them in, and I think nobody had the slightest idea what they would enter, and the intensity of the project triggers different things for different people. So it made it apparent that kind of giving a certain amount of framing for what's about to happen is necessary. But yeah, I mean, that's the ambiguity of perception of the piece definitely also has to do with predisposition of people. So like what kind of intensity you're comfortable with, and yeah, well, I have a very high tolerance, let's say, for strong stimuli, but yeah, some people definitely do react less, I don't know how to say, positive towards that, maybe.
Yeah, because it's very embedded and indirect, right? Meaning of this word, right? It's this experience.
Yeah, it's definitely it's one aspect of it. This kind of this surrendering to it, and this kind of giving up control. So I think, yeah, we definitely had, for example, this kind of reaction where people afterwards said, I'm not really sure if it was in a rehearsal or in Perfect Circle or Unity Switch, but this kind of thing where people would say, well, that was not me. I was not really doing this. So in the end, you came out and you felt, well, yeah, that was not really me who decided what happened there. So you're really super zoned out in a way, if it works for you. I mean, definitely not for everybody, but in general, that's kind of the tendency.
Yes.
And for Unity Switch, for example, we also pushed it a bit further. So in Perfect Circle, what we kind of constructed, let's say in the basic setting, was ambiguous in a way, but was more directed in actually creating a setting that would allow for empathy, for accepting another body, for also seeing through the eyes of somebody else. So this kind of realizing that your empathy, your personality, or how you feel might not inherently be linked only to your own flesh and blood. So there's obviously also a kind of political side in that as well.
A little bit tell about Unity Switch and what's different with Perfect Circle. And
yes, so in a way, for Unity Switch we were able to develop the tech setup a bit further. So the main difference for Unity Switch is that now we've got 4 rooms. And in each room, there are again 2 people in front of each other, this time in front of tables. But here the difference is everybody has a video glasses and a camera, and all these cameras and video glasses can reconnect as the piece goes along. So it means there are 4 rooms, and in each room are 2 people, and you would sit in front of each other at a white table, and you put on your gear, this time also headphones, and you again basically just see what your camera captures. So I sit down, I see if we did it together, I would see you through a camera, and I would also hear you through the headphones. So here it's this kind of seeing the world just through a camera eye also makes something, like I already said, this kind of slightly less, you're also a bit less fearful in a way for personal interaction, but it's also kind of a warped thing. So actually the lens width is wider than your human visual perception. So you kind of got like a super view. And the sound in that piece is with two microphones that are on the left and right table end. And it's like super highly amplified, but with a limiter so that it doesn't get too crazy loud. And it's put on your headphones. So basically everything you do, even if you scratch over the table just with your fingertip, is super loud. So it's also kind of like a bit like super auditory features. And it also has this warped thing, because now the stereo image goes like this, which of course is different than what your ears are. So you're put into a slightly different perception. But I mean, that even in itself is weird and fun. And but yeah, what the piece then does, it's super structured, and in those different scenes, you switch perspectives all the time. Yes. So it might mean that at the first cue, then I see through the eyes of person X who's sitting in another room, while you see through person Y sitting opposed to person X in the other room. So then from that moment on, we are kind of switching perspective with them. That is kind of what is almost similar to Perfect Circle, but then it goes further than this. So then, for example, we could switch, and I see myself through your eyes, and you would see yourself through my eyes, and then we would start interacting and doing things together. So yeah, the main difference is that it is that it allows a constant rerouting of perspectives. And so yeah, maybe what's also, so the kind of the changing in vision, it does the same with the audio. So if I jump to perspective X in another room, I also start hearing from room X. And maybe also interesting now from a musical level is, as everything you hear is just done through the microphones, you don't hear any real sound. And the fun part about that is that you can process the sounds, and that is actually what happens within the piece. Two things mostly change. One is pitch shifting. So from a certain point on, the pitch kind of starts to fluctuate and go a bit higher and deeper. So it's like, it's musically speaking, of course, it's quite simple, but you have this feeling that the world kind of is warping around you. And it does the same thing also with the room size, as in convolutional reverbs, kind of imposing different room sizes on it. So you got this, well, you're jumping through different bodies in a world that's kind of slowly changing. And in order to also make you feel that, or to make that perceivable, and also going back a bit to this idea of a kind of experimental test setting, the only sound sources within the piece that at some point appear are bells, like these bells you put on a table, and tuning forks, so things just with one pitch. But it's so clear and simple that let's say to actually meaningfully interact with those makes sense in such a setting. And then you, for example, if you hit the tuning fork, you would hear that it kind of starts fluctuating in time.
Coming back to Perfect Circle, right? I have a question, because how you came out with the logic, right? What happens in what time, and does this just work, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I tend to be very, I don't know, instructional, I think, about these pieces, like really really thinking about them as if I would do like an experiment in a way. So, and
like a scientist, right?
Sorry?
Like a scientist, yes.
Yes, right? Yeah, I think so. So it's first, well, for Perfect Circle, and Unity Switch is actually also the same. You first get the introduction as text, then you get the first very easy task. So it's sure everybody understands it and that you kind of engage with it. And yeah, I think then it's about different degrees of manipulating the setting, or kind of slowly enforcing different perspectives or on it. And well, yeah, how this then goes, I'd say I'm interested definitely in this kind of degrees of transformation. And so sometimes I think both pieces have a general dramaturgy of a kind of going further and further away from the real, from the original, maybe. But then it's especially for Unity Switch also about these cuts, about like really instantly jumping from one to another. And so that, yeah, that happened much more in Unity Switch, this kind of really comparison A versus B versus A, and now you see yourself, and now you see through the eyes of somebody else. So yeah, but beyond that, I mean, in a way, it is still very composed, I would say. It's still composed, and it's that I think a lot about the proportions and the how the proportions of the material stand in relation to another, and how you establish a material. Let's say first the tuning forks, then you go somewhere else, then you got the tuning forks plus the pitch shifting, then it goes away, then you got the pitch shifting of the tuning forks plus auto-tuned choir. So it's, in a way, it's kind of classical in a way, almost. It's I believe that for these kinds of pieces or settings, like a clear structure is definitely helpful, or only if you start with that, you have you can actually play with the anticipation and with the perception. And if you don't do that, then right away it's just a big everything is possible or nothing is clear kind of thing. So I tend to be super, very, I don't know how to say, like logical about it. I write an Excel sheet, like with the different sub chapters. Maybe before then I try out things, what works, what doesn't work, and then I see, okay, this is something that's super functional. I want that here and there, and so yeah. But of course, then at some point, I mean, I'm also not a scientist, so at some point it's also about the kind of poetic and poetic aspect of it, and kind of leaving the system. So of course it's always but you got to establish a system to leave a system. So, and I think that's actually, or you got to build it up to destroy it. So that's kind of what's and that's sometimes that I often do. But, and I mean, also the way I describe it now, of course it has a kind of theoretical or conceptual aspect of it, but it's, what for me is really important is they are not just an exemplification of some idea, or to just put into action something that could also exist on a paper. It is about the like the sensual perception and involvement of the audience. So it is really about the idea of making you feel it or understand it in a way that is not just theoretical or logical, because that could happen either in a science experiment or in a text. It's this kind of, to take you places, and then to let's say, to enable some sort of
new experience.
Experience or insight, an insight that in the best sense could be complementary to something that you would know through text.
Yes. And how many musicians were?
In Unity Switch, or in Perfect Circle, there were 5, and in Unity Switch there were 4. And yeah, in Unity Switch they were actually part of the so there was no differentiation anymore so much between audience and participants. So when you would enter and sit in front of somebody, you would sit in front of a performer actually, but then as the vision swaps, you would also be sitting in front of another audience.
And what was the role of musicians in Perfect Circle? What's it?
In Perfect Circle or in Unity Switch?
Perfect Circle.
A bit like I said already, it's kind of the they are leading the experiment, and they are kind of triggering the cues, and leading the audience through this experience, let's say. And then on the second side, it's also about about their control, and about how human or inhuman they are as the voice transformation or voice leveling starts to become more apparent during the piece.
Got it. And you said that you developed some technology, right? For what was that?
Well, in both cases, it's the video glasses, the cameras, and the rerouting system, and the
software, right?
Actually, the visual part is complete hardware in both cases. Yes. So the slightly more complex one is a Unity switch, and it's just video glasses, which are glasses that are consumer products for people flying drones. So that's kind of also a thing, if you have 40 people in the audience and let's say one headset would cost 1,000 euros or so, well, it might also be possible, but you very quickly have a lot of money for a short piece. So that's obviously also always the challenge. But yeah, so we used video glasses from, let's say, for drone pilots, which became so mainstream. And when things get mainstream, you get them cheap. And the same with the video cameras. Those are also often used to apply to drones. Yeah. So we took those out, put that together, wired everything together. Yeah, for these two pieces, it's been with wires, with Control and Genesis. Everything has been wireless. That was a horrible challenge. And then it's basically everything is rerouted. And for that, we went for an old piece of broadcasting equipment. So basically it's like a huge rack with, I think you can have them up to 80 inputs, 80 outputs. And then you can just say, okay, input 1 goes to 2, input 3 goes to 7, or whatever you want. And the good thing is these things can be controlled through Ethernet. So you can write a max patch and just kind of trigger one scene and it is instantaneous like this. And the benefit is, for those things to work, no latency is really important. Yes. And so that is the good thing. If you would go through, that would also be possible, I guess, but it's not so easy, actually. Even 8 cameras, rerouting everything through the computer, it's doable, but that actually, in order to have it work well and low latency and so on, it would actually be like super, super top notch. So yeah, I think the benefits we had is the quickness and flexibility through digital controlling. Yes. But everything is kind of hardwired, so it's instantaneous. It's just there. It's but the audio, on the audio part, everything was done through a computer. So basically, you would have the 4 rooms with the 2 microphones, and everything would go in and then route and send here and there. And so it's a bit complex, or the devil is in the detail, but in the end, it's not rocket science. It's just the technicality of it is, once you know what you want to do, not so crazy.
Yes, got it. But can you just a little bit tell me about, because as I understand, it's cooperation between you and somebody who made this technical work, right? Mm-hmm. How it was, right?
Well, Carl, with whom I worked on these pieces, basically joined me along. I kind of, for Control, I built a prototype of these things, kind of, let's say, a first stage. And then we started to work on the things together. And from that point on, he kind of took over, took it in his hands.
So it started with you. You built some first prototype technology.
Yeah. For Control, I made the first tryouts on a kind of very rough level. So just to see if it works, or if it's worth going down that road in a way. And then we made, I think with this, and then you could super quickly see that there's, at least in my perspective, so much potential. We made like first tryouts with students and without any rules, any staging, any performance, any whatsoever.
Yes.
And it was just clear for 1 hour, just the weirdest things would happen right away. But yeah, that's kind of how it worked. Then from some point on, Carl took over, and basically then build refined prototypes for the rehearsal trial sessions. Then we kind of worked with that, kind of looked what would work and what not, and we'd also sit down conceptually and talk about how we can use that system and what works. So he kind of then also worked kind of as an outside eye to give an external perspective on things. So that was very helpful. And and then at a point when we were clear how we would want to do it, then we basically would have to build all the things, which for Perfect Circle with the 40 pieces of hardware was a challenge. But yeah, that's how we did it.
Got it. And of course, just my feeling, right, that this piece wouldn't be possible without these video glasses, right?
No, without the video glasses, there would be nothing. There would be
exactly right. But could it be, just imagine the same piece, a video glass, but without sound or without music? So could it be possible that piece? Can you imagine?
It could, to a certain degree, be, but it would be something else then. I mean, like from the functionality, it would work somehow, but let's say, I think what differentiates what we did there from a scientific experiment to a big part has to do with the music, with the sound, with the kind of framing and alteration of things and creating scenarios, creating settings to be involved in somehow. And no, I don't think so. I don't think it would be possible. It would be, let's say, it would still be it would be something. It would be like a test tryout session for something, and that not even necessarily has to be a bad thing. But I think then you would need to bring in something else. Then it would really need to be a scientific experiment, let's say, with measurements and I don't know, like with a really different focus somehow. But for what we did, no, I don't think it would be possible without the music. It is these pieces are actually like super, I would at least say, very emotional, poetic, and kind of immersive, and all that has to do with the sound world. Yeah.
Got it. And can you tell me about cooperation about these musicians? When it started and...
That's already such a long time ago. I think for Perfect Circle, I really can't say so well anymore, but I think we planned the piece for a long time and then changed it, let's say, short notice. And I think then the whole process for Perfect Circle, I guess, was maybe a good half year, I guess. And Unity Switch came super quickly, as it is sometimes. I mean, kind of in a way, because it like started from that point already, so that was helpful. And I don't know, and there was not so much time, which sometimes can also be a good thing. It came very naturally in a way. Sometimes it is how things go. And with Perfect Circle, the majority of the preliminary rehearsals before we really went into it was to work on this balancing between voice and computer voice. So the challenge for these things always is if text understandability is crucial, but you still want it to be artificial. So they had to be super synchronized with the computer voice, which is difficult, but they did a great job. And for Unity Switch, for that I worked with Difan Ensemble in Finland, and I think there we just really we came with more or less with the ready piece. But that's that worked because I was lucky enough to work with the students here in Hamburg who are always, or not always, but are often interested or willing to to make like test rehearsals. So yeah, and I think then when we went there, we tried things out, and then it was just kind of, I don't know, making some passage a bit longer and some a bit shorter, but it was or how to, yeah, I mean, there are also, especially in Unity Switch, a lot of, for them, then performative aspects, which, and coordination and so on, which actually not such an easy piece. Actually, it sounds simple because you're just talking, having tuning forks and so on, but it's a lot of coordination also in Unity Switch.
Yeah.
Also, more at the end, the audience has to sign a contract and things like this. So that's kind of how that piece finishes. Yeah.
Right. And did you get some kind of valuable through that rehearsals and work with musicians? Did you get some valuable input that changed the piece, right?
I'm sure. For sure, there
Because I understand, right? It was a little bit like experimental design as well, right? You start with a sketch, then you develop, then you try out, and let's say you like, in IT it means, right, lean programming, right? You start with something and then add and test and add.
Yeah. No, for sure. There's it's definitely been like a constant refinement process, let's say. I mean, one things are just pragmatic things where you realize that's well, that doesn't work, or this would need more time and things like this. I think, and one other thing is throwing out stuff. So with both pieces, especially with Unity Switch, it started with much more things, like with the piano and a guitar and stuff like this, and it just felt well, less is more in a way, because you then can actually really focus on the interaction with something. And that, of course, also is true with the performers, this kind of the role of the humans within that setting, as it is so much also about this artificiality. Like, what role can they take? How can they what is their appearance? What is their form of interaction? I mean, and of course, that's always also a question for them. How do they enter the setting? Do they play somebody, or are they themselves just doing these instructions? And so, yeah, those things definitely work, both through trying out, through also seeing what works, also, of course, through these questions and recommendations of the performers. And yeah, it's I mean, in a way, to develop a piece like this without the audience and without the performers, also, there's just nothing. So I mean, aside from that, then I just have an Excel sheet with some scenes that I thought of. So it needs that, or that is kind of a bit where the piece then also develops. And yeah, we've done that also, like, there was a vital part, trying out and then just sitting down and speak about it for an hour or two. And yeah, that's in general something that I found more and more interesting. There we did it in the rehearsal process for Control and for Genesis. We also did it in ways that we made like actual questionnaires for the audience and then evaluate their responses. So even this idea of taking it a bit further of a scientific experiment, or also framing it in the context of artistic research, to kind of also make use of this, all these experiences, because that's, I mean, in a way, those settings facilitate reactions and perceptions, but in a way, it's a facilitator. And what then actually happens, like that, at least I hope it can be like a, I don't know, like a magnifying glass that kind of brings something to our attention.
And what would be your, let's say, free learnings, right? What you learn from this project, what you want, like, share with others, right? So that, let's say, some other new composer would work in similar settings.
That's a good question. I don't know, I guess a lot. So I think for me it had to do a lot with the reduction of material in that specific sense, kind of to be clear about which aspects you want to investigate, let's say, and how to do it that you take away as little focus from that as somewhat possible, with still maintaining the chance of being like, yeah, musical or poetic about the usage with the material, and finding an interplay between that. I don't know. I mean, that's definitely one thing. One thing I realized in these pieces strongly. Yeah.
And maybe it's the last question, right? What was maybe something what you want, something which I didn't ask you, but you want to say, right? Or some information that you want.
Nothing quickly comes to mind. I think one question could have been, what would have been the follow-up project for this? In a way, Genesis happened, which is, that's the kind of, maybe that's already the answer to it. So, I mean, I realized we did Perfect Circle and Unity Switch definitely pushed it forward further. And I kind of then, what was clear for me, the setup had such a potential, one could probably do another 5 or 10 pieces out of that. Yeah, and one question could be, which? And Genesis kind of turned into this kind of computer online game, which has a certain, but it's again more about control, like unidirectional interaction. And if you went down the road that Unity Switch opened, well, I felt it could open, or for me, 2 roads, it could have gone down. One, to be even more political about it, something where the aspect of who you interact with, who, let's say, questions you, or who puts you in a certain position, also who puts you into this kind of setup. And it's so let's say the framing of this can be done in multiple ways. And one I felt could have been interesting would be a kind of a more political framing of this. So also, for example, in the end of Unity Switch, it sort of opens that door already. So in the end, there's a lot of stuff happening. And at some point, you get back to your own perspective. You see the person in front of you handing you over a contract and a pen. And you start reading it. At the moment you start reading, your perspective switches to somebody else, and you see a hand signing, and 95% of the people just signed along the contract, which is then taken out of your hand again, and you then kind of take off your glass. That's kind of how you exit the piece. So there's this thing which I already mentioned a bit before, like who's in control, and saying or being not being sure why you did something. There are people afterwards also said, shit, I actually had no chance to read through what I signed there. I hope it's all fine. I mean, obviously it's an art piece, and I'm not gonna sue them for all they have or something, but still this aspect was interesting. And I don't know, amongst a lot of them, I felt to create something like that maybe might make perceivable for an audience to be in the shoes, in the body of somebody in a framed political setting, where this kind of usage of perception and framing and power could be displayed and made more understandable.
So thank you very much, Alexander, for this interview.
Sure, my pleasure. Great.